We have a kind of what we call it. Actually, I just get in last 3 months, and then every month or every month we have a call from FEM talk. So this is your turn. And last month we had a big.
Okay. Oh, nice.
And now we talk related to economic health. In every FEM talk, we also record it, and then everyone who want to directly follow our seminar, they can see on our streaming.
Okay. It's directly streamed or it's stored for future?
Directly streamed. Okay. If you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Yeah. Then we put it in the YouTube.
That's it. Okay. I'm going to look at it later on. Yeah.
How many minutes?
It's approximately an hour.
Okay.
A little less, I think.
Okay, because we still waiting some our member. If you don't mind.
I don't mind. If you have just indicate how much time I have, so I will update my length until how long.
Yeah. Because we will meet at around 1 o'clock. Right?
Yes, I think there's lunch before that. I can be a little late, but not too late.
We can go together there.
Very good.
And maybe we can finish our meeting at say 12:50.
Yeah. And how much time for questions do you want to bring in?
Maybe if your talk is around 1 hour, let's say we finish 11:30, and then discussion around 30 minutes.
That's good.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Very good.
Okay. Bisa, Mas?
Is this the file? Yeah.
Actually, I don't know. I planned this year around November come to Germany, Belgium. If it is possible, I will come to Wageningen.
That would be great.
Are you at the time in Wageningen?
I am independent. I am around the week of the 13th of October, from the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
And that week after, I'll be in Korea. So, but before and after, I think I'll be back. I might be away for 1 day or so, but yeah, that would be great. If I know on beforehand, I can arrange a meeting with our director, so the dean of the social sciences group, also to meet and to establish contacts.
Yeah. And for sure, I will still waiting what our rector give us direction, because we already met with the president, president, and then also every faculty follow up. Because I already mentioned him that Faculty of Economy and Management ready to follow up what done in the academy.
Very good. No, so this is not smart farming, although I do know a bit about smart farming. That could be next time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, could be next time.
Some of our staff members continue study in Wageningen and other Netherlands University, Maastricht. Mbak Eva kan Wageningen kan? Is Wageningen.
Which on Omta? Okay. He just retired. You might know that. Yeah. That's it. So it was 1 floor down, 5th floor of the living quarter. I'm in the 6th floor. Yeah.
And also Mas Januar, Wageningen ya? Oh.
That's bad luck. My daughter's going to study there. Good university. Yeah, right.
And another, Mia is from Maastricht University.
Yeah.
Any other from Netherlands? Maybe you will follow later, yeah, for PhD. Apply directly to Professor Hogeveen. Hogeveen. Yeah.
We can talk about that.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was a property. She did her PhD in Utrecht.
Okay.
So we have 4 Dutch women.
Under your super.
No, not. She followed the course with me. I think 2 courses.
Okay.
I have 2 courses on economics of animal health.
Okay.
And part of the program what we did was on that course. But you're deep into the avian influenza. So we got 4 Dutch alumni from 4 different universities: Nijmegen, Utrecht, Wageningen, and Maastricht.
Ya. Ada lagi nggak ya yang dari any other from other Netherlands universities? Etria Wageningen ya. Under. Oh, okay.
Also Omta.
I think the popular professor as a supervisor, yeah?
Yeah, but that's the way it works. It's also if you choose to go somewhere, you need to have a contact.
Right.
And I think that the group of Professor Omta did have and still has quite some Indonesian PhD students because of the contacts.
Right.
And I think if it goes well, then you probably will you will contact others and directly that's the way it goes. Yeah.
But I believe.
Now the group is chaired by clinic.
Yeah, temporarily. They have a new chair. Wilbert is his first name. I just met him recently. Boltzmann, I think. So they have a new chair. Jack Sinnekens did it temporarily. And I thought that maybe Jack would be the successor of Onham. But I think Jack didn't want to do that. So he brought in somebody from outside of the university. Yeah. That means if you record it, does it mean that I need a microphone?
No,
there's a microphone.
Let me ask the operator.
Yeah, very good.
I think you don't need to have a microphone, but I think this sensitive. Then your voice is this recording can directly record your voice.
You have to be relatively close to it.
Yeah, no, not really. Let me check with the.
Where do you want me to stand for the camera? Ininya ya, Pak.
Oh, ini programnya. Oh ya Pak, ini bisa kelihatan ya.
Jadi Pak, ini di sini ya berarti ya? Atau di belakang situ? Di belakang situ ya Pak, posisi yang udah. Terus sini nggak nyampe.
Oh dia
Ya enggak.
langsung bisa. Langsung penyerahannya. So this device sensitive enough. You do not need to have another microphone. Kalau ininya taruh mana ya mas? Supaya video dirinya gimana? Mundurin ya. Oke. We are going to start our FEM talk in next 5 minutes while Mas Rio is preparing the device because we will record directly and everyone who will follow our seminar can just click on YouTube, yeah, and we inform directly that everyone can still follow our meeting today, even someone is not here. Depan Mas Eko, depan.
I guess I'm going to make a picture of you all.
Yeah.
Let's start with that.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'll make a picture of you to show home as well where I've been.
I have to also sit around here. I think we can start now, yeah, while someone will come later on. Because usually every Wednesday, every department at IDB have a meeting just even only 1 hour. Maybe just in your university, almost similar with coffee break meeting.
Okay.
Coffee morning. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is our pleasure that Professor Henk be here to share the experience, to share knowledge that Professor Hogeveen already done so far. It is again a good opportunity for the Faculty of Economy and Management. And Perhappy is Agriculture Economic Association. Pak Arif actually is also part of the board of advisory in the organization. Professor Henk will share knowledge related to the economic of safety. It is or economic of health, economic of food safety. Economic of food safety. It is very important. Not many scholars in Indonesia pay attention related to this issue. If some scholars interested, it is really still fragmented. From health department, they did and they enjoy what they are doing. From people from social science, they enjoy what they are doing. And what Professor Hogeveen is really like to integrate all sciences to have a focus on food safety. Actually, Professor Hogeveen background is economist, but then he understand that the food safety
is become more and more attracting scholar. So within 1 hour, Professor Hogeveen will share the story. Apart from his experience, he gives some courses related to food safety economics, big data for business decision, analysis of problem solution, situation, introduction to management and life science. And currently, Professor Hogeveen is a professor at the Department of Social Science, Business Economics at the Wageningen University and Research. Welcome, Professor Henk Sirga. Professor Henk is the chairman of Agriculture Economists Association Indonesia. Just last year, it is the end of period. He was actually vice rector for resources as well as for strategic issue. Welcome, Professor Henk. Thank you very much. And now, Professor Henk, time is yours. We have 1 hour, then will be followed by another session for discussion. Please.
Yes, I'll try to do without a microphone. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yes? That makes at least my life a bit easier. Thank you, Pak Nunung, for the nice introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. And to my shame, I have to admit that I had better contacts until so far at IPB with the veterinary faculty than I had with the Faculty of Economics and Management. Although in Wageningen I'm working at the Department of Social Sciences within the chair group of Business Economics. So in that sense I'm an economist. But my background is, well, being a farm boy. I grew up on a dairy farm. And in the Netherlands, and maybe that's interesting for you to hear as well, my father could not go to college just because that as a farmer you did not go to college, and that's in that time it happened. So I'm the first generation of my family that could go to college just because it became possible to go to college. And then what to do as a high school student? Well, you choose something that's quite close to your background. So I go out and did animal science. And during my animal science, I learned about economics. Of course, in high school as well, but on economics and applying it to animal diseases. And I loved that idea, and I love that work. So I'm a very happy man. I'm a blessed man that I was able to get this interesting two parts together, to link economics and animal health. And in that sense, I'm a bit humble here in this group, just because I think that most of you know more about economics than I do. But what my field indeed is, as Pak Nunung indicated, I try to combine fields of animal health, knowing something about veterinary medicine, with my knowledge about economics and with my knowledge about social sciences, which makes me, for many economists, not a real economist, just because I don't dream in differential equations. But well, I try to solve problems applying economics. And that's my goal in my research life. And by starting to work on that, first starting with production diseases, and production diseases are that diseases that appear on a farm that have no influence outside of the farm. So in fact, those are very basic economic decisions, right? It's a disease. The consequences are for the farm. There's no negative externalities involved, which means it's a farmer's decision, it's a farmer's optimization, and that is a very basic economic problem. I learned as well that many diseases, and especially those diseases where society is interested in, are the ones that are linked to human disease, zoonosis. And that kind of started my interest in the field of economics of zoonosis, economics of food safety, and bring it to a bit of a broader level. And I try in this hour I have to share a bit about that knowledge with you. Right. So what are the topics of this presentation? I'm gonna start with you a little bit into the need of what's called a regulatory impact analysis, because zoonosis, food safety problems is an area where governments are looking at. Why are doing that? I'm gonna share with you 3 basic methods where you can work with economics when you do not have any monetary benefits, because that's the big problem in economic food safety. There's no monetary benefits, or at least it's very difficult to measure monetary benefits. Some special interest for the social cost benefit analysis, and I'll end with 2 examples of research. Well, you can, and that's typically where we start with from economics, look at goods as being private goods, right? And we can look at food safety as a private good. And in fact, if you do it that way, then it does have an effect on demand. It has an effect on public wanting to buy safer products because it's better for my health, which means I want to spend more money on it. So a very basic issue, private good. And in that sense, food companies or food salesmen, or it can be very small companies, the market salesmen, it can be huge, big integrated companies, can optimize their level of food safety, providing the wishes of their customers. Okay. So you could think about what's the cost of the program, or testing schedules to guarantee the safety of the product, etc. And you have to weigh that additional costs versus, well, what's the risk of contamination, and you can monetize it, or what's the expected benefit of a high quality image. Especially for the bigger companies, certification schedules work for your image, which makes your brand stronger. And it's kind of that type of weighing. Economics is often about weighing costs versus benefits that we can work at. But food safety is not only a private good. Food safety is especially a public good. Governments all over the world, in very rich Western countries, in countries like Indonesia, which are getting to belong to the richer countries, but also in very poor countries, all governments in the world are concerned about public health. Some more than others, but it's a public good, which means it's something that's organized either by a healthcare system, by insurance systems, but also by regulating food safety. And of course, governments can do that by setting minimum standards of safety. The products may not contain more than so much of a certain contaminator or so much of whatever. And there's all kinds of regulations to set minimum safety, the maximum residue limit type of stuff that are allowed in products. Those rules differ between countries, which of course impose major trade issues. I'm not going to dive into that, but that might happen. Governments may put traceability systems in place. Governments may regulate farm animal health or vaccination schemes, etc. Also chemical regulations. What chemicals are allowed, which chemicals are not allowed. Well, you know about that, and it happens, but that's what's happening. Now the big question is, how does governments make decisions on that? Well, there's a few methods for doing that. And interestingly, if you go to this source, quite a nice source, already from 1997 from OECD, a source on regulatory impact analysis. And what can happen is you can, as a government, start with a bunch of experts. You just ask them, they go to your department as government, and they tell you what they think is good. You can also work on consensus. You can work politically, just following what political leaders are saying. You can try, and that's becoming a bit more scientifically interesting. You can work with benchmarking. Just look what others are doing and regulate it up to your level. Or very, very, very best, empirical. You go into fact finding, you go into the field, you use analyses, and you create all kinds of parameters. Often, in reality, it's a combination of all 5. We do have some knowledge, we have some expertise. Of course, we want to create some consensus. And yes, well, you know, in politics, hey, the politicians themselves have to be agreeing on it as well. And benchmarking Nothing wrong with that, because if you want to trade, it's good to look a bit at benchmarks. But it's interesting as a government how to make decisions. Often when you look at these, economics do not make a big point of that. Often governments make decisions based on a kind of feeling. Is it not too expensive? But the big question is, what is too expensive? And that's typically economic questions. And when you look at it, typically economics are not used very often. By the way, same type of decision making is also done by companies, right? So companies are not different from governments, except maybe this part here. But then companies have directors and board of directors that also have influence. Good. So what about something called a regulatory impact analysis? And that's a method where you look at the regulations you set as a government or as a company or whatever, and you see what are the effects of that. And when you look in the world, there is an immense increase in the number of regulatory impact analyses carried out. So it started somewhere in the 1970s in the US. It was made official policy the earliest in the 1980s, 90s, and now also in Europe we're starting to use regulatory impact assessment. And that means that by law, every regulation of a government should be accompanied by an impact analysis, looking at the economics. What does it do? What does it work with? How do we continue with that? And that's, of course, an immense amount of work, and I'm going to say a few words about it. Good. Well, now there's a big problem. The problem is the monetarization of benefits, right? If you are looking at production, and if you're looking at companies, you can work with production functions, you can work with efficiency analysis, you can work all kinds of ways to optimize production level. If you add more input, what will be changes in output, and is there how is the relation between it? So that's relatively easy, although we can make great economic models out of that. And it's, of course, it's the ex ante decision making, which you look, hey, what if in the future? But of course, people often forget it, but it's very important to also look back. Well, we did change that. Did it bring what we thought? Ex post analysis, also very important with empirical research. Okay. Now, as a company, it is difficult to estimate the effect of a lower level of contamination in your company. What will happen if you reduce the contamination of, well, for instance, salmonella in chicken? Yeah, it's a big integrator. Well, that will maybe reduce the number of recalls if that happens in your system. Or it may increase your image. But what's the value of image? How can we make this into rupiahs? Because the costs of reduction of contamination is relatively easy. That means there's all kinds of measures, and you can just basically calculate that. Cost multiplied by numbers, etc., etc. It's a relatively straightforward calculation. But the benefits, well, you can describe them qualitatively, but to quantify them is very, very difficult. So that's for a company difficult to work at. And maybe it just happens based on feelings. I'm known as a high quality company, so let's work on high quality and make sure we're the best in the group. It may depend on the value of your brand. If your brand is Coca-Cola, losing the good name of your brand because of a food of a safety scandal is very, very bad for your brand name. So you want to prevent that at all costs almost, right? But if you're not such a high brand, well, you know, difficult to work at. Same thing also for governments. What are the monetary effects of human health and human disease? Well, part of that is relatively easy. Cost of illness types of methods, we know them. And cost of illness means how many days is somebody hospitalized, what's the doctor's cost. We can even have some indirect costs, such as the time that patients use and people accompanying going to the hospital, the number of days they are unproductive. But monetarization of unproductive days becomes difficult. Because what's the value of your dean when he is hospitalized and he's not working for your faculty versus the cleaning lady? And how do you monetize that? And do we take an average value or separate values? But what of the risks of your dean becoming ill versus the cleaning lady? So that also comes down to a bunch of ethical questions, right? And we even have things like death. What's the value of life? And if you lose time, again, you're the same person. Jordine versus the cleaning lady. Is there a difference? Well, I'm a religious man. I think humans are all equal in that sense, but economically we're not. So how to work with that? And that is something that we have to keep in mind. And that makes life very, very difficult into the monetarization. And that also makes the struggles. Now, in order to overcome this and do something, there's three basic methods that we can work with. The first one being a cost minimization analysis. And I'll explain later on what it is. A cost effectiveness analysis, the second one, and a cost utility analysis as a third one. You can see that in all three, the cost is the same. But as I told you, the cost is the easy part of the work, right? Because that is straightforward too. Now, cost minimization analysis, what is it? It's an analysis of something where we know the outcome. I've been working a little bit on avian influenza, as some of you here have been working. And if you're going to set up the most efficient program to eradicate avian influenza, the outcome is clear. Eradication, period. Zero avian influenza, right? So that is a very well fixed outcome. Eradication. And then you can think about several programs that all have the same outcome. Well, we can try to eradicate it using method A, vaccination of all poultry, systematically through the complete country, through as long as needed to eradicate disease. Or another way is to go outside, we cull all contaminated cattle as quickly as possible so we can reduce spread. And that means we also can eradicate it. Interesting, of course, you expect a certain outcome, you're never certain about it. When Indonesia was hit by avian influenza, the first ideas of the government were to eradicate. But it didn't work that way. So in that sense, we are expecting a certain outcome, sometimes, but not always we reach it. Okay. You only look at the monetary costs. So what you do is you take the net costs of the program. And the net cost of the program is the cost of the program, how many vaccinations, how many checks, how many tests, how many governmental personnel goes out to farms or go testing products or whatever. There might be some monetary benefits at the same time of the program. And you just look at the cost minus those benefits, and that's it. Because the effect is the same. So you take that program with the lowest net costs. Very, very straightforward. Although, in the calculation, I have not any examples. Of course, in the calculations, this might be highly complex. Right? And our group did do studies for the Dutch situation, how to eradicate diseases if they appear. What to do if you got an outbreak of foot and mouth disease. Well, we did quite some calculations on that as a group. If we got an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in the Netherlands, at this moment, there's going to be a plan already in place. And the setup of the plan was based upon cost minimization. That's going to be the most efficient plan, which means that every infected farm will be culled, but we draw a circle around that farm of 2 or 3 kilometers, and all farms in that circle will be culled as well. And that's stringent methods. That means that the government goes out and closes farms down and takes a circle, and the police is activated there, and there's a transport barrier, and there's control about that. Well, it seems to work. That's what it is. Although nowadays it also gives some public uproar as well. Shouldn't we kill all these animals? It's a waste of animals. That kind of thinking. But it can be done. And that's cheaper. I don't grow the data, but that way it's cheaper than to say, well, we only cull the infected farms. That is also possible, and yes, we can eradicate it, but we have many, many more farms being infected because we are a very densely populated country. We have many, many farms close together. So therefore, the idea is, as soon as there's an outbreak, infected farms will be culled. Circles around will be drawn. Farms in a circle will be culled as well. And that is how it works. So cost minimization analysis. Straightforward approach, but sometimes very difficult calculation, although it seems simple. Especially at the country level. Good. Well, how to use? I already told you a little bit about it. For instance, eradicated zoonosis or another animal disease. We have been eradicated brucellosis, which is a zoonosis that affects dairy cattle, for instance, or goats, as well as humans by abortions. Quite a nasty disease, but it's still endemic in quite some countries, as well as Indonesia. You can work on that, and the goal is eradication. So what you do is you identify the approaches how to reach your goal. You make sure that they all reach that goal, which is difficult, I told you, because that was how the eradication of avian influenza in Indonesia started, with the goal to eradicate. It didn't work. And you calculate cost and side benefits and you just compare. It sounds easy, might be quite difficult sometimes. Good. What are the limitations? The problem is that many times, especially with endemic diseases, we do not aim for a total eradication. We aim for control. In food safety, we do not aim for 100% safe food. Impossible. You all know that it's not possible to guarantee 100% safe food. Period. Which means that we don't have a 0-1. We don't have a binary outcome in that sense. And that then you can't use a cost minimization analysis. The thresholds are often not very clear in that. So that means that we have another way of working, and it's called a cost effectiveness analysis. Well, what you look at is still looking at a single effect. It's a single non-monetary effect. And it could be expressed in physical units. So, for instance, the percentage of contaminated products, or the number of days with illness, or the number of infected animals, or whatever. Something that you can measure, quite straightforward, but it's simple. And everything else is expressed in monetary units. And what you then do is you create a cost effectiveness ratio. Basically, again, you calculate the costs of the program, the net cost of the program, cost minus the changes in benefits, but you express that to a change of the intervention. So a change in the percentage of contaminated products, or a change in the number of infected animals, or a change in the number of people that are hospitalized, or a change in whatever. Right? So, and then you can compare things, because you might have that a very cheap, and I have an example of this, you might have that a very cheap approach does not lead to much improvement in patients, but still has a very high cost effectivity, because it's cheap, it limits the disease a little bit, but per reduced patient, it's very cheap, right? And we always think about eradication. I'll show you as an example later on. Good. When and how to use? Well, when you have a single output. Very important. You need to have a single output. Okay. Oops. And when programs are believed to have a different effect on the outcome. And again, I can give you the avian influenza example. There's a whole bunch of things that your government can do to mitigate the level of avian influenza. Maybe not eradicate, but mitigate. Some things are expected to have a bigger effect than other things. And we can compare them by looking at, for instance, the number of new farms being affected, or the number of farms being affected, or the amount of poultry on the market that is positive for avian influenza, or whatever. Right. So, same things, you define your programs, you evaluate the effect of each individual program, which might be very difficult to do, given especially in poultry the immense complexity of the poultry value chain in Indonesia. You define cost and benefits, and you evaluate cost effectiveness. And then you can rank them. And ranking is an interesting thing, and that's why this little figure for. Let me explain. You can rank them by, for instance, plotting the cost effectiveness. And there are programs that have high costs and a low effectiveness. Well, they're lousy programs, right? Don't do that. There's programs with a high cost and high effectiveness. Well, they might be useful. There's, of course, this program with low cost and high effectiveness. That's great. You like it. A program with low cost and low effectiveness. Well, often this doesn't happen. But you can plot your outcome of the disease. Because there's a whole bunch of different approaches. And you know you have a budget as a government. Here. And you know that you have something that is minimal for the country. So we don't want to have any less or any more than such and so just because or whatever. Which means that the program should be in this corner here. Although these are highly effective, they're also too expensive. They're above your acceptable budget. And although this one is very cheap, it also has too low effectiveness. Well, of course, the best possibilities are the other ones here. These are worth considering, but of course, if you can do this, then you never will do that one, right? So you also can draw a frontier. Going through this line. Okay? And everything above that frontier is not worth considering. And whether you choose this one or that one depends a bit on, well, the budgets, the goals of the government, and then you can rank. And again, you know that the economists as well, we don't make decisions as economists, we support decisions. Yes, we support governments making decisions. But that's something you can come out of this cost-effectiveness analysis. But now, the limitation is that we only can work with one single variable, number of patients. It's difficult to look at severity of patients, right? If you look at salmonella, for instance, in the Netherlands, salmonella, mostly due to contaminated chicken meat, cause a few dead persons per year because of heavily complications when you get a salmonella infection. For most people, when you get a salmonella infection, well, it's 2 days in the bathroom, basically. Yeah. And it's bad, and it's not fun, but not very severe either. So, how to compare that? Because the number of patients due to salmonella is very high. How to compare the few dead people with the large number of patients with only minor effects. And you can't do that with a cost-effectiveness analysis. So the answer to that is a so-called cost-utility analysis. And what you try to do there is you want to weigh a bunch of various outcome variables. And you create one single combined measurement, which is a non-monetary measurement, but you try to combine it. And all other effects, again, are expressed in monetary units. So it's the same in the cost side as we do in all of these programs. We work with that. So you compare program costs, monetary benefits, and then divide it by the change in this cost, this utility measurement. What and how to use? Well, when you want to express the effect of several programs in one single summarizing variable. And if programs have different effects on utility. Again, the whole setup is exactly the same. We're working on it. I'm not sure about it. No. Back. And I didn't put this in this presentation because it would be too long, but have you ever heard about the concept of disability-adjusted life years? Or quality-adjusted life years? Not. Okay. Well, no slides on that, although I'll come back to that later on with the example. The solution that people found to compare, well, let's use this salmonella example again, to compare people that have a very minor infection of salmonella or the ones that have a very severe outcome and very much complications is by using something called disability-adjusted life years. And if you have a disease and somebody dies of that disease, that's lost life years, right? So the person dies when he is 40. You expected that this person normally would become 85, which means 45 lost life years. If a child dies, it's more severe than if a retired person dies, right? And so you can compare that to start with. And secondly, what you do with the days that people are ill, you weigh them. And if the illness is very, very severe, then it has a very high weight. So if I'm ill for a year, let's say if I die, oops, then it's lost life years. And if I'm ill for 1 year, and it's a very severe illness, so very low quality of life during that illness, they have a very high weight to that. So suppose it's exactly for 1 year and there's a weight for 0.8, which is very severe. You say instead of 1 year lost life, you have 0.8 year lost due to disability adjusted life. If it's a very minor thing, you know, last year I had knee problems, well, that gave a bit of trouble, but that's it. That might be a weight of 0.1. Well, that's life years lost 0.1. And that way you can compare things. And if somebody struggles for 5 days, it's something else than if somebody struggles for a year. And that way you can compare all kinds of different diseases. There's two approaches: disability adjusted life years. That's one approach. The other one is quality adjusted life years. They basically have the same type of ideas. And that way you can combine diseases or compare diseases, or to compare salmonella versus avian influenza as a disease and as a disease. Even you can look at it. What you see happening nowadays in the Netherlands, for instance, is that there's more and more discussion about should everything we can in medical science be applied. So if a person is really, really old, gets cancer, and there's only, well, a very, very expensive therapy is available, costs 2 million euros, do we want to apply it? Do we want to use it? And of course, that's an ethical discussion as well, but we can't do it all. And there's more and more very expensive medical solutions are becoming available. But how much are we doing that? And there's been a huge debate at a disease called Pompe's disease, which is very rare. There's medicines, but cost of the medicines, whatever, 300,000 euros per year. And effectivity of the medicine is, well, it seems to help, but not 100%. Should we apply that? Should we pay as society for these treatments? Yes or no? And they use kind of the same concepts for this comparison. Okay. So, interesting stuff. Limitations, well, you need to have a utility measurement. The DALIs, the disability adjusted life years, for instance. And ranking, oopsie. Ranking is still difficult. You have to still do the same type of frontier type of ranking. The final way of working is a social cost-benefit analysis. And a social cost-benefit analysis takes all costs and all benefits for society into account. And of course, we have to start monitoring. And the social cost-benefit analysis do have an immense, large intellectual foundation. It's already in 1844 that people started thinking about social cost-benefit analysis. But that was in the US, and it was about infrastructure. Should governments invest in railroads or in roads? Yes or no? It's taxpayers' money, but, well, what should it do? And we have to look at the full public benefit. If you create new roads, we will benefit from it. Only the happy few that own a car, or is it happy few in the meantime a very large proportion of people and doesn't work better? So it has a big foundation. Interestingly, already more than 100 years ago, somebody came up with the idea of willingness to pay. So a way to monetize public goods is to ask people, what are you willing to pay for it? Well, you probably know it has huge limitations as well, because do I really know what I'm willing to pay for something? I was willing to pay a couple of million rupiah because, well, that's it, but really high amounts I'm never willing to pay. And sometimes I don't know the consequences. What we saw with the railroads is that, interestingly, when they started and when they were put in place, even the people that thought that they would never use them started using them. So a supply does create demand. Although before that we didn't know we started using it. Like everybody in the Netherlands, or large people in the groups of people in the Netherlands were opposing the start of railroads because of all kinds of reasons. There were monstrous machines, etc., etc. But when they were there, people thought, "Oh, that's useful, that's handy, let's use them." So sometimes it doesn't work. But these principles are quite old as well. And then in the 1920s and so far, externalities were put in, because externalities are typically public goods and typically long-term thinking. And long-term thinking makes that the public should be associated with it. So that's playing a role, and well, there's lots of work. But the foundation is quite old to start with. Nowadays there's a nice water. And nowadays there is a big range of approaches for social cost benefit analysis are available. For the Canadian cost benefit analysis, for the Dutch ones, for all kinds of different countries, maybe even from Indonesia, but I didn't search that. So it's something which is nicely worked out. How should we approach such a cost benefit analysis? And what you have to do with that, you have to bring all effects, both monetary and intangible, both direct and indirect. All effects has to be expressed in monetary terms. So intangible, here's the big challenge. How to bring intangible effects into monetary terms. But they try to do so. And there is a bunch of underlying theoretical assumptions that within a society, that those who gain could compensate those who lose by reallocating resources. Okay? So, yes, there's people that support others here. And that's because it's a public good. And that's the government needs to kind of reallocate this. And that's an important line of thinking, of course. What you do is, of course, you have the net value again, and you have the benefit cost ratio, which is the changes in benefits divided by the costs. But it's just looking at it. So it's the most complete quantitative approach. It's also some kind of a gold standard. From a societal perspective. The advantage is that it allows for a comparison of all governmental programs. So you can combine projects in infrastructure with public health projects. Yeah. While the cost utility analysis, you could only compare public health projects, for instance, or with the whole medical work. And the cost effectivity analysis is even smaller. So this is the broadest work you can do. Of course, the big disadvantage is that monetarization of all effects requires immense amounts of assumptions. And you see that happening if you look at social cost benefits analyses that have been carried out. You see, oh wow, those are assumptions. You have to assume everything. You have to assume the value of life. You have to assume the value of a disability adjusted life year. And you have to assume so much because they're so comprehensive, but that is a challenge. How to monetize? Well, it depends. Of course, you can work with individuals willing to pay for the program benefits. The very old-fashioned contingency valuation method. But also, you might do it a little better, where you, as for instance, in conjoint analysis, we work with that, right? To make people making trade-offs between different utilities. So, what are you willing to give up in order to gain something? It's based upon the utility theory, of course, to do that. And it's a bit of a more complete method than just the individual willingness to pay. But that's what the basis is. And what you then, of course, work with that individual willingness to pay is that what's the maximum utility, and it's a function of illness, death, and others, given your budget, right? What are we willing to pay to reduce the probability that I die? Well, if I have a higher budget, I'm probably willing to pay more than if you have a lower budget. Also, we know that this willingness to pay differs very much. If it's prevention, my willingness to pay is much lower than when I'm already diseased. Well, it might be the same. I've even done some experiments with that. It's very interesting to see. Prevention, people are not willing to spend too much money in prevention, while they're very willing to spend money on the disease itself. For instance, think about all kind of bad habits. I'm not sure whether people are smoking here, but we kind of know that smoking increases the risks for lung cancer. Sorry for you. Giving up smoking is much easier when already lung cancer is diagnosed than before that. To be honest, in utility theory, it's not very useful when it's diagnosed already because you're too late. But then people can quit very easily. While as prevention, it seems to be quite difficult. So that is an interesting. While it could be useful at that moment. So interestingly, there's quite some disadvantage about this willingness to pay, but that's the basis of a social cost-benefit analysis. And it's of course very difficult to measure this utility. So it's there's a good, nice, interesting paper that from Henk and Kohlberg in 1987 with a great foundation of value and benefits of health and safety regulation. Good paper. Good. So in practice, we often use approximations. So when you look at the social cost-benefit analysis that are used in practice, they don't go as deep to carry out the willingness to pay for this specific disease or that specific work. They use some kind of work on mortality studies and morbidity studies, and based on those, we start estimating the willingness to pay because we know that people are willing to pay so much in general. And what you then do is a few approximations. You can say, hey, there's a human capital related to cost of illness. That's basically the expenditures that are associated with diseases. The cost of the hospital, the cost of the doctors, the cost of transport to the hospital, etc., etc. But of course, that doesn't take into account that somebody dies, there's a life years lost. When somebody is severely ill, there is suffering. Right? The suffering is an intangible one. So there's in the other methods, there's cost of illness as a basis, plus the willingness to pay to reduce mortality, and the most combined method is the cost of illness plus the willingness to pay to reduce mortality, and some kind of euros, and that is the value of life, and some kind of euros or monetary value multiplied with the utility, so with the disability adjusted life years. And for the Netherlands now they say 1 disability adjusted life year equals 80,000 euros, which is whatever, many millions of rupiahs. So if you know this utility, it's just a simple multiplication. Personally, I think, well, if it's that simple, why don't you just do a cost utility analysis instead of making it all? But anyway, that's what you do. Limitations, well, they don't adequately capture individual disutility, especially mobility. It's a very, very straightforward calculation, and it's based on weights anyway. And who decided how to weigh a day in the bathroom because of salmonella versus suffering from a heart attack? Right, and the one is weight very small, the other one is the weight very high, but what's in between? And sometimes I've seen weights where I thought, huh? Really? That bad? I don't think it's that bad. That's exactly. So the willingness to pay also reflects the ability to pay. So there's an income position here as well. And there's a disagreement about the combination of utility measures. People are struggling a lot how to monetize it. Yet, the method is more and more applied also in the Netherlands nowadays when it's about public health, governmental programs. Our government requires a social cost-benefit analysis. Good. Let me try to quite shortly give you some examples because it was highly theoretical, quite a framework, quite an overview. Let's now look at it how we have applied this in practice. Well, the first study, 2006, from Buddha Voswamadi. He was my first economic PhD student, my second PhD student in total. And we had a project on the control of E. coli VTEC. E. coli is a very common pathogen. We all have it in our feces, we all carry it, but some types of this pathogen produce toxins. And that's the VTEC. Well, octine might know that it's a toxin. Yeah. And you can have a disease from it. Buddha did a bunch of analyses, and amongst others, a cost-effectiveness study of beef slaughterhouse decontamination measures. And in the end, he also compared the measures you can take in the slaughterhouse to the measures you can take on the farms. And then when you could look at the chain, what would be the best, but he never published that work. It was the final chapter of his PhD thesis, but it wasn't different studies. And what is it? E. coli 015787. At that moment, it was quite prevalent. 1% of the minced beef products was contaminated. Doesn't show to be very high, but we do eat a lot of minced beef in the Netherlands, so it's high, especially in steak tartare. 0.3% was quite highly contaminated as well. And steak tartare is often eaten raw, which means it's non-cooked. And of course, E. coli VTEC, it's died when you cook, but steak tartare is eaten raw. It's a raw minced beef product. Seems to be very nice, but a bit dangerous to eat. Okay. And we have 7% of infected dairy farms. Per year, there's a human health bill. We got 1,250 cases, mostly diarrhea, but 22 so-called HUS, hemolytic uremic syndrome cases, and that's a heavy kidney problem, especially occurring in children. 2 children in a year. It doesn't sound very much, but it's quite comparable to the number of victims due to avian influenza in Indonesia, and we often use that as a reason that we really should avian influenza in Indonesia. So, 3 other diseases, and in total there's 116 disability-adjusted life years is as consequences per year. Good, so it's a problem. Not the biggest of problems, but it's a problem. Well, and what did we try to do is, we tried to rank all slaughterhouse interventions or combinations based on effectiveness, cost, and cost effectiveness. Well, idea is to create a simulation model, because how to calculate that, right? Create a simulation model, resembling the slaughterhouse process from the dairies, that's animals from the farm, they're huddled together, then they're slaughtered, dehydrating, eviscerating, splitting the carcass, tail removing, trimming, washing, chilling, quartering. And it goes closer. So this is the place. Quartering means it's quarter carcasses of a cow. We took an average initial slaughter at that time, slaughtering 500 cows per day. And these are the 9 stages. And there was in every stage there were 2 risks of contamination. One is from the environment, and the other one is that the carcass was already contaminated. And also there's a probability of decontamination, because by cleaning or by trimming, you can decontaminate. We had contamination being a binomial, so it's either contaminated or not, and at the end, we created some kind of a colony-forming unit, so made it better. Lots of input, all kind of ideas about the farm animal prevalence, all kind of prevalence we know from research, and the output was the prevalence of infected quarters produced on a daily basis, or the number of species. So the big job here was not economics. Economics were relatively easy. The big job was trying to find the effect, which means this is interdisciplinary research. This means we have to collaborate heavily with people in our slaughtering. And if you leave this type of work to those people, they never are able to bring in economics, but we are never able to do this without people knowing the slaughterhouse process. So this is typically interdisciplinary work, but very necessary. Good. Well, we had a base scenario doing what the slaughterhouse is doing now, and we found that 9% of the quarters are contaminated with 20 colony-forming units per quarter. Then there was a bunch of potential programs. Hot water wash, which you do, let's see, here, at the splitting process. There's hide wash, There's a rinsing with lactic acids. There's trimming, which means taking out contaminated patch of meat. Vacuum, irradiation, which is gamma irradiation, which is a very high technology approach. Washing the hide with ethanol and steam. So all kind of possibilities working on that. And they're applied to different parts of the process. And in the end, when we run the model, it comes out that there's input in it, coming from literature, knowledge, etc., the best that you could work, and then we run the model. Well, what you see is that what this includes the reduction of all these measures, and well, mostly there was one paper of Phoebus that did a lot of good work that we could use, and also the probability of elimination. Well, that's all it. In the end, the results is effectiveness. So the prevalence of no intervention was 9.16%. If you do irradiation, it's hugely effective. Hardly anything is left. If you combine everything, this is just ranked. If you combine everything, well, you should have the same results as irradiation, by the way. If we only did hot water wash, we got a reduction from 9% to 6%, and everything in between. So this is the effect in gravity, and of course there's the percentile as well. This was a stochastic model, so it's look at that. Next step, we calculate additional costs. By recurrent costs, labor, materials, maintenance, but also non-recurrent costs, facilities or machinery that has to be purchased. And then we need the lifetime interest, and it's annuity based. So quite straightforward ways to calculate the cost of all these measures. In the end, we combine it. So we had the total costs in euros per quarter. And you see also big differences because irradiation was our most expensive, cost €4.65 totally for equipment. While the cheapest was the brisket opening, it was very cheap, and a bunch of stuff in between. But again, you can go for the cheapest, but it might be effective, or you can go for the most effective. And therefore, we determine the cost effectiveness, and I have something here. It's a lot of figures. Yeah, this is better. So I skipped the figures given time. But what you see here, this is kind of a least cost frontier, the prevalence. So this is a reduction in prevalence. And these are the costs. By the way, irradiation is somewhere here. So irradiation is not on the figure. And what you see is that this dotted line, that's the least cost frontier. Of course, the trimming is more expensive, or is the same cost as the washing. However, it is more effective. So why do washing? Well, this for the same amount of money is more effective. And if you want to improve the system, you can go to steam pasteurization, and that way you can go further, and this you can combine. So hide wash, the H, well, it's not effective because it's under this line. But you can see that hide wash might be more effective because this is also the confidence interval putting in these places. Well, that's a way to represent. And then people in the chain can kind of look at this and say, well, what am I willing to spend? How much do I want to go down? The same thing you can do because this one here was for the prevalence. You can do the same thing for the numbers. You can do the same thing for the colony-form units, but basically that's the same types of results, and it has to do with our way of modeling that we multiply. And of course, in the end, all these types of, because we're highly dependent upon all kind of assumptions, there's the idea of looking at the cost of the sensitivity analysis, where we look at suppose that we minimize or maximize costs compared to the baseline. What would happen in the cost effectivity ratio? And you can say that if we have higher costs, it becomes less interesting than steam pasteurization. So yes, the cost and our assumptions are important here, because the most optimal decision does depend upon our input. Okay, so it's important to keep that into mind. Conclusions. This is a great illustration of a cost of dinner study, and we could look at irradiation gave the highest reduction, but was very inefficient to carry out. So better work with more trimming or steam pasteurization to show the best cost effectiveness relationship. Still a little time left to look at the social cost benefit analysis, and that's a more recent paper, not from me. It's from the Dutch Public Health Institute. In fact, interesting paper just because they look at the design of the analysis. How do we do it? And therefore I thought it's interesting. This was aimed at Toxoplasma gondii in the Netherlands, which is also a zoonosis. It's a protozoal parasite. It's able to infect lots of animals as well as humans. Total cost of illness in the Netherlands, assumed to be 44 million euros. We have 12 deaths each year, 1,900 disability diabetes. So if you compare it to the E. coli problem, this problem has much more effect. And people are looking at that. Well, the Dutch guidelines now, they say there's a bunch of steps you have to go through. You have to start with a problem analysis, establish baseline alternatives, define policy alternatives, determine effects and benefits, determine costs, analyze variance and risks, and give an overview of the cost and benefits and any results. And this is the approach that our government needs for this type of approach. Well, first step for this disease, current state of affairs, main active stakeholders, what are the current interventions that are done? And I skip that because that's not it. Reference scenario, well, the basis is a current prevention. Okay? And the current prevention is creating awareness among pregnant women, because pregnant women are the ones that are most prone to get toxoplasmosis. And some assumption as well, the assumption is that if we implement interventions, they will be adopted by all European countries. Why? We have a highly exporting business. So if we do things in the meat business, and it's only for the Dutch population, well, then the costs are for double the amount of patients we reach. So then we will improve the health of German people in that sense. Interventions, well, 3 interventions. Vaccination of cats. That's one intervention that's possible. Cats are quite well known to be spreading toxoplasmosis. Freezing of meat. Instead of having fresh meat, we always freeze meat and then sell it unfrozen. So it's not as fresh anymore as it used to be, although much of the meat that we buy now in supermarkets has been frozen, but we don't know it, it's allowed. Or enhancing biosecurity at pig farms. So 3 types of possibilities to reduce. And then the thing is, what stakeholders do we have? We have consumers, human health, producers, that's pig producers, employees, education. Who is affected by measures? Well, if we do cat vaccination, producers are not very heavily affected. It's just consumers having cats, and they have to do something, right? But if we enhance biosecurity pig farms, it's producers that have to do a lot. Of course, in all methods, the toxoplasma-related patients' costs will be affected. And of course, less infections will lead to less special education about it. So that's equally. But you see that the different measures have effect on different stakeholders. Well, now let's define the benefit. The benefit is in a reduction of health burden. And that is the disability adjusted life is multiplied by, and they worked between 50,000 and 100,000. I say that we use 80,000, but that's kind of the common sense. Euros per disability. So that's a very straightforward monetization. Just multiply. The difficult task is the costs. Many assumptions, because you have to think about the change in demand. If we start working with frozen meat because it's less fresh, which means that the demand of meat might change. And it might have an effect of consumer benefit as well as an effect on producer benefit. And I tell you what, these people doing this are not economists, so they can take very easy assumptions. We would write 2 or 3 papers about this, looking at costs, at supply and demand, and make nice differential equations. They just have a quick change of demand multiplied in the price. The non-healthcare costs, freezing meat, well, different cost price, different demand. Contingent valuation, well, they are trying to do a discrete choice experiment about what is the willingness to accept frozen meat instead of fresh meat. So they propose some work on that. But also, what is the big biosecurity cost, high production cost? That will also have an effect on demand, just because the price will go up. So it's very difficult, but there's lots of stuff to do. Next step, assess the net benefit, but you have not done it yet. Sensitivity analysis and present analysis. So that's the idea. Overall approach means you have consumers, healthcare, education, linked to disease burden. There is cat owners, pork producers, employees, and social security pensions being affected by toxoplasma interventions, and that has an effect of transmission. And that's what they're going to do. So it's a very big study with immense amount of work. Some final remarks. I didn't want to leave you out on this one. We're talking a lot about farmers here. The pig producers in the toxoplasma example, but also the cattle producers in the previous example about E. coli vitae, because in that research we also look at farms. And we kind of assume rational decision-making behavior there. And in these types of study, we never look at, are farmers going to do that? Just say that's additional cost for farmers, right? But are they going to do that? Well, you might make a regulation, but are they complying with regulations? I know from the avian influenza in Indonesia, there was lots of regulation, but compliance, not 100%. Yeah, far from 100% sometimes. So we have to really think about farm behavior, and that's a bit where I'm focusing on. And recently we had a PhD thesis finished by the APSOC, quite interesting, about farmers' willingness to invest in animal livestock disease control. So what is their willingness to invest? And interestingly, what he did, he looked at it from a utility theory level of thinking by just looking at the external utility of voluntary vaccination. What's the utility of vaccinating against it? Was a disease called blue tongue disease. What's the utility of that? Looking at that and seeing that one farmer has a higher utility than another farmer, and in general most farmers have a positive utility, which means you can expect, based on utility theory, that farmers are willing to vaccinate the cattle. Yet, not all farmers do that. We know that from practice. And he did lots of work on looking at attitude from the theory of reasoned action, which is a follow-up the theory of planned behavior. It's a theory from social psychology. And in the end, he even combined the cost utility or the utility theory approach and the social psychological approach together in what farmers could do. But in that sense, we did quite some interesting work where we also integrated choice experiments and latent variable approach into what are farmers doing and looking further than just utility. Looking also at attitudes, looking at social norms, looking at perceived behavior control. And so those are interesting approaches. I'm not going to explain it because that would take another hour. But that's it. That's my presentation for this hour. I hope you could follow it. I hope it brought enough novelty for this group of economists, and maybe some food for thought. Let's start the question, I guess, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now we are going for discussion. If any questions from all of you, please raise your hand. What actually we interesting message from children is that it is time for us to have kind of multidisciplinary research study. Since sometimes neuroscience enjoy their own lab and economists also enjoy some formulas. But then Professor Hogeveen shows us that actually when we work together, just for example, to understanding food related to the talk show, and then another is ecology. Then we found the interesting intervention that potentially be applied for the government and community to reduce the cost, even to reduce the impact of this disease. But also interesting related to this topic, actually whatever disease actually come from food, right? So how to minimize the impact of food intake into our body to prevent the potential disease. Is anyone want to ask for this discussion? Prof. Hermanto.
Thank you, Bang. Thank you very much for very clear and interesting presentation. I would like to have your comment about internalization of such cost consequence of this into the producers. I can give you one example in Indonesia related to the food safety. Sometimes the processed food made mostly by home industry or very small food processors, lacking of hygienic approach, something like that, and cause some problems with the society. And then the cost of that mostly are borne by the consumers, and maybe also some subsidy from the government. But how to reduce this kind of incidents by putting the fair penalty to the producers?
Yes, yes. Oh, that's a difficult, good question, but also a difficult one, right? Otherwise, we would have asked it. Everything. The interesting part is, of course, that here it is the first step would be, and in many countries, the internalization of these consequences is something that is becoming a private good. The fact that from a certain producer products are contaminated becomes public knowledge. Outbreaks of zoonoses or outbreaks of contamination generate lots of press attitude, and that means that producers are very highly aware of the risks, and the risks are very high, they know that. And that means that they internalize this in their behavior. So there it's solved by the immense consequences that it has. For instance, have you heard of the fipronil problems we had? Fipronil? Yes, in the Netherlands we have an outbreak of fipronil. Well, it never ever reached any level that public health was in danger. Never. Fipronil is a chemical compound used to destroy lice. And blood lice is a disease in chickens, but if you use fipronil to use in chickens, that means that eggs will be contaminated with fipronil. If you want to de-lice or de-flea your dog or cat, it's commonly used. I have a dog at home, and every 30 minutes we use some chemical compound to de-lice it, and I got a higher contamination with fipronil than I will have ever from contaminated eggs, yet it's forbidden. Then it was used by a small company that was going to farms to control blood lice, And they had this miracle compound that they never told the composition of, and farmers said, this is great, this works so well. Yes, it did, because it contained fipronil, we got contaminated eggs, which meant that 3 million chickens were killed. We got millions and millions of eggs taken out of the market, and the consequences were very, very severe. That means that farms, knowing this, will be very aware of not doing it. So in that sense, the market solves it. It's a private, it's in meantime a private point. But suppose now that the market does not solve it, and I think that maybe in Indonesia that might be the case, then the government has to step at the market and has to look at regulation, but also come up with testing schedules to work that. So our farmers did not get a fine for using fipronil, although they didn't know they were using it. They were punished heavily, severely by the market to make it not attractive to use something. And I think knowledge about the disease can help that. So what's the advantages for a farmer to do something that is forbidden? Well, then the penalty should be higher than that advantage. That's basically the way to do that. And of course, then it's the government as well that has to set up the regulation. The problem with regulations is, and we don't like regulation ourselves too much, because there is a bunch of regulations, while what you want to happen is that farmers or producers themselves do something that's correct. But as soon as the market is not solving it, you have to go to regulations. And in my opinion, our government sometimes trusts too much about self-regulation, so that the producers do it themselves. So they have to step in this now and then. And the Indonesian government, I guess they make regulations, but they don't make sure that compliance is worked out. That means you have to go out, take samples, test accidentally a farm, enough times that you have the probability of getting caught is high enough. The other thing is what plays a role is also the attitude of consumers, right? And I think when it's about poultry, you have two systems: the fresh market system or the wet market system versus the cooled chain system. We all believe that in a cooled chain that all risks are lower than the fresh market systems. I think as long as it's really, really fresh, the risk is quite small, but you don't know whether chicken is really, really fresh. You have to trust the salesman. Okay. For what it's worth, sometimes it's good trust, sometimes not. While consumers still have quite a preference for the wet market just because of the freshness attitude. It's fresher, so better. I guess Dutch consumers think, oh no, it has been in the heat, ooh, can't be good, right? So you go for the cool chain. But it has probably been a change of attitude in the past 100 years. And that freshness part, that frozen meat, or meat that is cooled, is not as fresh and not as good as meat from a wet market, which is fresh, is something that also has to be changed. And that could be campaigns, whatever. And if that doesn't change, then there will be demand, and then we will have this part. So it's the two double things. And together with Dickie Indrawan from the IPB Business School, who was doing his PhD on this, and we were thinking about push or pull. Do we pull the market by consumer demand? Well, that's not enough. That's not going to be enough. Although governments like that, because then you don't have to do anything, right? Or is it pushing the market? And if you push the market, sometimes it's necessary, but compliance is key here. And I think that might be a problem with many producers, that they don't comply, because they're not motivated to comply. And because that regulations are never followed up. I use the word enforcing, but it's a bit of a strong word. It means like the military are in there, but that's a bit strong. But if regulation is not enforced, if nobody checks up on the regulations, well, why should I follow it? I hope this answers your question a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other question? Yeah, please.
I'm Triana. Thank you for your presentations. I'm really excited because I also learned some about cost-benefit analysis, but it's new for me. And my question is, you said before that the benefit program is hard to calculate, but in some method you also use a monetary benefit. So actually there is a method also I learned, like this cost method, but it's not calculate any benefit. But in your method, you still use monetary benefits.
Yeah.
So how could we how could we calculate the benefit, the monetary benefit from opportunity cost or something like in the last sample? It's easy to calculate the cost of actions, like fresh meat and fish meat, but it's hard to calculate the benefit if there is not so fast amount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Yes, I understand the question. The question is about that I told in two of the three methods, cost minimization and cost effectiveness. I said, well, you don't need to look at the monetarization of the benefits in terms of diseases, right? Yet I used in the calculation, I said the net cost consisting of cost minus some monetary benefits should be taken into account. Well, for instance, if you go to the E. coli VTEC or 0157 example, when we looked at measures at the farm level, one of the measures was making sure that cows had clean drinking water. Okay? Making sure that cows have clear drinking water means that there's costs for drinking troughs where manure, feces cannot fall in. So they're more or less closed with a big bowl, and the cows, when they want to drink, they push down the bowl and they can drink. Well, that is a cost factor. Yet, for the farmers, there's also an additional benefit of using those troughs, just because there's less other diseases as well. So doing that, there will be a benefit for humans having less E. coli VTEC, and that's difficult to monetize. But for the farmers, because there's other diseases on the farm that affect cattle, for instance, paratuberculosis, that's a disease, believe me. And by using these troughs, you do not only reduce the risk of transmission of this E. coli VTEC, but also the transmission of paratuberculosis, which is something for the farmer. So we have the cost of these troughs minus a little less of that disease, which saves you some cattle, and I can monetize the cost of a cow and the value of a cow. So that's something that is a benefit. Many times we have cost of a program, but there's some benefits as well. If the program consists of culling animals, oopsie, I have to buy new cattle, but there's some benefits because my old cattle will be slaughtered. So I'm talking about net costs. Is that clear? So some of the benefits can be expressed in money, but not all benefits. And in the final cost-benefit analysis, you try to express everything in money, even the very, very, very difficult stuff, such as human health. And while in the other ones, there's some other benefits as well. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. For instance, in the slaughterhouse measures, there was only cost. There were no other benefits that we at least not taken into account by us. Although I do believe that if you use irradiation, you do not only kill E. coli VTEC pathogens, you also kill Salmonella pathogens and Campylobacter pathogens. So we made a little simplification here that we looked at the cost of irradiation for all, only for the E. coli VTEC, while in reality there's much more disease you can prevent with that. So yes, but it is indeed, it is different. Yeah. I hope it's clearer.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
One or two more questions.
My name is Gali. I'm a graduate student of economic science. I want to talk about regulatory impact of analysis. As we know, since 2016, Indonesia changed the import beef regulatory from country-based to zone-based import scheme. I want to ask how the method for analyzing the regulatory for especially for economic food safety in Indonesia, especially for farmer and consumer.
Well, do we have a little time? I think I understand your question. You're talking about that Indonesia changed the import regulations for beef.
From the country-based country, example, Indonesia now import from India. As we know, based on OIE, Organization International Based Epidemiology, India is not free of food and health disease.
Yeah.
Now Indonesia import beef from India.
Yeah. Okay, which means there's a higher risk of importing contaminated cattle.
Yes.
In the old days, it was very specific in countries. So, typically, a regulatory impact assessment, you look at all effects of that. And the government did this for a certain reason, probably simplicity of regulations or something like that, which saves them money in testing and in working with import and export permits. At least I can think of that as being an advantage. While by doing so, you increase the risk of contaminated animals. And I'm not sure about whether they have tariffs involved as well. So because if there's tariffs involved, import tariffs, right? You make beef from outside relatively expensive compared from the beef produced in Indonesia itself. And so you have to look at what would be the effect of these regulations on the risk of diseases. How many people do you expect will become ill because of it? So there's cost associated with that. Versus maybe the benefits in the reduction in regulations that you have. Versus the changes it will have in the relative comparative advantage. So there's comparative advantage theory, right? You know, the trade theories. What the comparative advantage of your cattle producers are, and whether they would produce more or less given these regulations. And you add all of these effects. So all of these assessments start with sitting around with a bunch of people, economists, people that know about cattle diseases, people that know about public health. They're sitting around, what would be the consequences? Just start thinking, what would be the consequences? What can we imagine would be the consequences? And economists will immediately start thinking about trade advantages and production and cost of production, etc., etc. While somebody from public health said, oh no, this is disease, and etc., etc. Now, so you make a list. It's like almost in a social cost benefit analysis. You start with a list of stakeholders, a list of effects, very qualitative. Next step you do is you start thinking about, can we quantify this? So it will have an effect. There's more imports from India. Well, we know India is not free of whatever disease. That means we'll get more cattle with that disease. How many people do we expect will be? So then you start quantifying it. What is the cost of disease? Is anything already calculated about the cost of disease? Because what happens is cost of disease calculations. Sometimes people already in the E. coli VTech, there was a publication in it about cost of E. coli VTech. Of disease. Great. Then we don't have to do it. We can just use that and multiply. If not, you have to start calculating the cost of disease. And that way, you first qualitatively look at all effects. Maybe you rank them for the most important effects and the negligible ones. The negligible ones you say, hey, it's great, but let's forget about it. And then you start calculating all of these effects and adding them together. And that's the regulatory impact assessment. I think that the start, and that's a start that is often not done very well, and it's typically that is the transdisciplinary or the interdisciplinary work, is that you sit together with a team of interdisciplinary people talking about what will be the effect, brainstorming, putting on all kind of writing down, oh, this could be an effect, discussing it, looking at it in whatever, a day of a workshop or whatever, to find out the consequences, and then you start monitorizing them. Okay, that's helps.
One more question, please, Thank you very much for your nice presentations. As you stated, farmers do not always make rational decisions. So even the benefit cost analysis may be produced to clear results, but maybe they are not interested to invest more, for example, in the security investment. So what do you think? What factors that affect the irrational behavior of the farmers? Maybe, I don't know, this is just my opinion, whether they have like risk adverse preferences in investment. So even the benefit cost analysis solves the clear results about the higher benefit of investment, but because the diseases are uncertain, they can happen, it can happen, also cannot happen. So they might tend to keep with the status quo with their existing investment and not improve investment. So what should be done by the policy makers to give like some incentives or encourage farmers to invest more on this basis?
Oh wow! What should be done by policymakers to stimulate farmers to improve? You're supposed to toxoplasmosis, and they looked at this cost benefit, and they think, yes, we go through the second option, and that is improving biosecurity on pig farms. That's going to be the way we're gonna reduce it. Personally, I think that first of all, the costs of that have been underestimated because people forget about the cost for transition, because these pig producers have to transit from their current system to a new system. And transition always costs money. Right? Economists know that. And then besides that, and that's the difficulty, is that it's not always rational. So what they calculate, they say, okay, there's going to be cost for pig producers, right? And that's the total cost. But maybe it costs much more in subsidies or whatever to make pig farmers change their attitudes and their behavior than estimated because of this thing. So that's in general. More specifically, in order to do that, you have to start learning about farmers. We talk about farmers, we often do not talk with farmers. You did your research, I know, because you went out to farmers, to poultry farmers, to find out about biosecurity measures and also try to find out what would motivate them to change their behavior. And that is very, very interesting research and very interesting work. First step is always start with a very clear farm-oriented analysis of the costs and potential benefits of changing. Yeah. If you take brucellosis, personally I think brucellosis will benefit farmers more than it costs when they eradicate it. Because it's a highly contagious disease, it has severe consequences for abortion for cattle, so with severe economic consequences, so it's very effective for them to control, yet they don't do it. So first we have to find out, suppose we're going to work on that, what is the cost and benefits of eradication of brucellosis on individual farms. Then we want to look at, are there differences between farms? Because we always look at the average farm, but we don't want the average farm to change, we want to have all farms change. For some farms it will be very, very efficient, some farms it will be not efficient. Because those farms had a low risks and they have already a good system in place. So we also want to find out the extreme values. If you want to eradicate something, it has to be eradicated on all farms. That's the problem with avian influenza. It's probably more or less controlled on the larger industrial-sized farms, but not on the smallholders, which means there's a continuous source of infection for the other farms. And so we have to look at all farms and look at the cost benefits. And also, study of yours show that for Magloon farms, for instance, it's not very beneficial to change policies just because the way they're paid. Yeah. So we have to find out for the different farms or farm systems whether it's for all of them cost efficient. If we know that if it's for all of them cost efficient, we still want to know about it. Okay, what does motivate them to change behavior? Because until now they didn't. Is it just to lure them that's cost efficient, that's enough? Or is more needed? And we have to, in order to do that, I think we have to more and more go to either theories like principal agent theory type of approaches, or maybe to social psychology theory. Principal agent means that between the processor or the trader and the farmer. But the government in principal agent theory is a bit far away, so that could be go through social psychological theories to influence them. And that is something to work out. And it should be a combination of these types of methods, so we know about farmers, we work with them, and then we have to implement it in policies. And the more we start learning about that, the better we are able to predict it for the next time. Right? If we now learn a lot about avian influenza and poultry farmers and different farm systems, it's probably relatively easy for the next time to, or another disease, if we want to do something in Newcastle disease or whatever, to learn how they will react. But yes, so that would be the approach. But it's hugely underestimated by policymakers how important farm management and knowing farmers and their motivations, economic as well as non-economic, will be.
Okay, good. Thank you again, Professor Hogeveen and our colleagues. Okay, it is difficult for moderator because we have a time constraint and we will have another meeting actually at 1 o'clock. This is just initial stage that Professor Hogeveen will come to our faculty. We plan to have some more collaboration with Wageningen. Recently, our rector also just visited Wageningen University to re-establish and then to have some more collaboration. And in the morning, we've discussed already with Professor Hogeveen that there are some potential room to have a collaboration, education, research with our faculty. And also next year there will be conference, if I'm not mistaken. What you are
Yes, the WISE conference will probably be held in Wageningen again, yes.
Yeah, and we propose Prof. Hermanto, maybe with the Indonesian Agriculture Economics Association, we can collaborate to have a conference in Indonesia. Indonesia can be host, inviting many scholars from many countries come to Indonesia. Maybe we can make some plan further to this. Yeah. And at 1 o'clock we will talk in the international office related to smart farming, and we do hope our faculty can contribute to develop the proposal for this research collaboration. Last but not least, again, thank you very much, Professor Hogeveen, that already gave some new side related to economic or food safety. And this is not the end of your visit. We hope next year or even this year we can still have some meeting. We plan hopefully October or November we visit you to make more detail and action plan for next research activities. I would like to invite Professor Hermanto as chair of Indonesia Agriculture Economics Association, as well as professor in our faculty, to give a talk to Professor Hogeveen.
Thank you very much.
very welcome.
Yeah, you can open it.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Most welcome.
Yes.
Hope a lot of collaboration in the future.
Yeah.
Yes.
And thanks also Mas Ahmad from School of Business, the Ekonomi Professor Hogeveen visit our faculty. Actually, personally, some of us already have a collaboration in Wageningen, but we believe in the near future our faculty has more tightened collaboration with your business economics school. Yes. You want to say something?
Well, yes, I'm always a bit flabbergasted about the hospitality of Indonesians. So nice to be here, and it wasn't my first visit, although my first visit to the Faculty of Economics was with Ekonomi, was a bit informal somewhere at an office. Yet it's good to be here. And it's good to be with other people that are working in economics and see the need for interdisciplinary research, because that is so important. And we can hide away behind our computers, creating great formulas and diving deeper in some kind of virtual economic world. Yet we always should be able to link our work to what we're doing and to what are the real questions. Our work is decision support, in my opinion, and that's what we should do as well. And I never ever will forget my roots in farming, and I think I will be always be able to explain what I'm doing to a farmer as well. And as long as we keep that in mind, I think there's a great future for economics worldwide to support our work. And that's some of the economics are getting that, but I'm so happy that you guys here are keeping that alive as well, so it's very good. I'm looking forward to next meetings.
Thank you very much. Big applause. We'll see you again soon.
Yes, very good.
Up here.
Yes, I should have let you know, because we work at the moment, we're working heavily on the paper together.
Yeah, so do you have time?
Probably the end of the day. Yeah, the end of the day. Yeah, or some. Yeah, it's tomorrow, it's Saturday morning. Friday, I guess my day is Friday, and Saturday, 10 o'clock. Yeah, so well, we keep after reception, so there we can see that. Today it's my international office, family faculty, and I'm not sure when that ends, but it's also possible. We can leave with after I finish the time.
Ini kita bisa bergerak sama. Sebanyak-banyaknya saya mau daring banyak, jadi silakan teman-teman sibuk gitu.
My name is Henk. Nice meeting you.
You work on horticulture.
Yeah, horticulture and also dairy. Yeah.
So dairy.
Yeah, I'm working with Asia, Australia, Center.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's an important part here, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
And here's our vice dean, academic friend.
That's good. So it's time for all the story almost. Yeah, very good. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you very much. And well, it's, it was very broad. I know. Still, it's getting an overview and maybe generate some ideas.